Dr. John Vanderslice, and I'm here to talk about another essential element of fiction writing. What I'm going to talk about now is something a lot of writers think about a lot, and sometimes to the extent that one could call it the bane of their existence, and that is plotting. How do you come up with a good plot for your particular story? Because everyone knows a story needs characters, it needs a plot, things have to happen. Without a plot, you're A, not going to have a story, and B, will leave a lot of readers behind who won't necessarily tolerate a story going on and on for too long without knowing what's the direction of this story, what's the point. I think about plot a little differently myself personally. There are many standard plots out there in the world. They even have names, often derived from screenwriting, to structure your story in advance. You say, okay, this is the structure I am consciously going to imitate, and I'm going to follow the pattern. Basically, it's patterns. And those patterns aren't necessarily wrong. A plot that's working will have a discernible pattern. From the writer's point of view, and me being a writer, what I'm concerned about, well, how is the best way for me as a writer to get to the pattern that's going to work for my particular book? The books I've published, I would say, yes, have very discernible patterns. And I was aware of those patterns as I was writing. But how I got there isn't what you necessarily would expect. So the very first thing I would say is make darn sure before you even think about, well, what is this character going to do? Make sure you have that character pretty clear in your own mind and on the page. So probably the most important aspect of good plotting is to have good characters. Good characters in the sense, not that they're flawless people, but they are characters that a reader would like to follow. The reader's interested in them. They're engaging. They're believable. You've already conquered a lot of the battle of your plotting if you have characters that someone wants to pay attention to. Because then the reader will. And you'll be surprised sometimes how far the reader will go with you. The reader senses, I kind of like reading about these people. Let me see what happens to them. So that is, to me, good fiction comes out of good and engaging characters. And it's impossible to talk about plot without being grounded first in characterization. So make sure your characters work and you want to stay with them. Most books and most standard plots, it's an easy way to think about it as beginning, middle, end. And I think that's fair, and I think that's important. So I'm going to do that too. And a couple things to keep in mind is in the first, let's even say first 10, 20% of your book, make sure you have an inciting incident. The inciting incident is what basically launches the story that the characters are going to follow. What's their desire for the rest of the book? What's their mission for the rest of the book? What gets them going? And the sooner you can get it into your novel, the better, because that tells the reader, oh, that's what this book is going to be about. Yes, the reader has to be grounded in the characters, but if you give the reader something to expect, like, oh, that'll be what they then start focusing on. Like, for instance, I recently completed a draft of a novel in which these two characters go into a bookstore, and it's a used bookstore, which are wonderful things, used bookstores. They find a book that is completely inexplicable to them. They do not understand how the author of that book could have written such a book. It makes no sense. So their mission established for them unexpectedly on a rainy Saturday afternoon is find out what they can about this book and this author who they think they know already, but who was past, and figure out where this book came from. And that's basically the entire rest of the story, although there's lots of things come up in the book that are completely unexpected to them that make the rest of the book, but that's fundamentally the core, and that happens within the first, I would say, 5 pages of the book. So get that inciting incident quickly, and then you got the reader tag along, and then you can play it out. I would say the other important thing is to trust your instincts. Give yourself flexibility. If you've got a hook, you've got the inciting incident, what you need then to do is just play. Okay? Play. See what happens next. You don't necessarily have to plan it all out in advance. You can have a spur of the moment decision after writing this. That could be a very good one. Just play with it, run with it. A draft is that. It's just a draft. It's an ideas you're putting on paper. Don't reread it too fast. Don't go back and check your spelling. Just push the story on. See where it goes. That's my idea of plotting. Once you got that inciting incident in place, let's see what happens next. It could be, if it's surprising for you, the writer, chances are it's going to be surprising for the readers as well. And then following up and explaining that unexpected development then leads you to other developments, other ideas for your story. There's a lot of self-trust and self-patience that goes into writing, and especially in plotting. You have to trust that, okay, this development and this development are finally going to make sense, but I don't know what that sense is yet. I just need to be flexible, have patience, keep writing the story. The story itself will reveal how these things are connected. And I guarantee you, that happens. Trust your story. And one of the things I like to say about writing is that a lot of it is delving into your unconscious and bringing things up from the unconscious, ideas, connections. Here's the thing, the unconscious is not as messy as we think it is. The unconscious, in some ways, is smarter than you are. It knows all sorts of ways things are related that you're not consciously aware of. But those come out. You just trust the writing process. Let yourself write. Now, what that means is you do not necessarily have to have your plot all planned out in advance. I would advise against it. To me, outlines for a novel or a long piece of fiction should be as much descriptive as prescriptive. That is, they're describing what decisions you have already made and the way the book is already done. So if you want to plan, you want to outline, that's fine, but don't let that become a cage. Certainly do not let it be a reason that you're not going to push ahead in your story and be flexible and trust it. The middle of the book, the problem there is energy. I'm going to quickly just say to you, the middle of the book is where often writers give up. Of novels. And whatever it takes for you to keep pushing the plot onward, do so. You got to invent new characters. You got to switch the point of view. You have to just bring in crazy developments. Push the energy of that middle portion of the book, because if you stop and the reader stops, you can't ever get to the big conclusion at the end. The endings, of course, are where resolutions happen. What does resolution mean? Well, it's the end of your story. Well, what does that mean? Well, don't expect that when you get to the latter part of your novel, that everything's going to be tied up, wrapped up. That can feel a little artificial to a reader if everything's tied up too nicely. What you want to do is make sure the core question that you, the writer, the character set out to answer is answered. There may be lingering questions that still remain, but that core question must be answered, and the reader has to feel like the essential emotional battle, if you will, of the story has come to a resting point. I read long ago an idea about endings, and it said the ending of a fiction should feel like you're watching a play and the curtain comes down on the players. You can't see them anymore. You know they're back there playing. You don't know what they're doing necessarily, but you know they're back there. But it's okay because you've seen enough. All right, so the end of a novel, the end of your plot, what you should feel like the writer or the reader should feel is that they've seen enough. You've shown enough. You've worked things, enough complications in, there's enough resolution that the reader doesn't need to go on more after that. In a nutshell, that's when you reach the end of the book.